Well, folks, you know you're in for a treat when you hear that tune because it's time for another episode of the RecPoker podcast. This is the forums editions where we talk strategy based on posts from our forums or Discord server. We also have a chats edition where we interview poker personalities live on YouTube every Monday night at 7:30 Eastern, 6:30 Central Time. I'm your host, Rob Washam, and you can find me as Rabman50 almost everywhere. And we have the best freaking job in the world talking poker with our friends here on the podcast. I have to mention that we're brought to you by Running Aces, the official sponsor of the RecPoker podcast. Most of what we do here is free. We're a largely volunteer-based organization, so we depend on support from our sponsors and also from our premium members who take part in our training material and study opportunities for only $22 a month. Do you like talking poker with friends? For just 75 cents a day, come connect over Zoom with other fun, encouraging poker players, all trying to get better, or sign up for free, because everything starts with a free account at RecPoker, where all you need to join is an email address and a smile. But remember, you can always get your first month of premium for only $5 by using code RecPoker at checkout. Now, they're letting me host the show today, but I'm only one man, and it takes a group, a gang, a village, a crew to make all the magic happen around here. We call this group of wizards the RECing Crew. And if you want to learn more about me or the rest of the RECing Crew, just go to rec.poker/crew, or you can just listen up because you're about to meet a few of them right now on the air.
I'm Chris Jones. You can find me 5B5 on Blue Sky or 5x5 in the PokerStars home game.
And I'm Taylor Moss. You can find me at Taylor_Moss on X. Or as Gopher Boy TJM in the RecPoker home game, which I stream live on Twitch on Wednesday evenings at 8 p.m. Central. Come tune in and check it out. Twitch.tv/RecPoker.
Okay, because this is the forums edition of our podcast, we open it up to our premium members to join into the discussion. And today we have one of our premium members, Joe Millay. Would you like to introduce yourself, Joe?
Yeah, hi, I'm Joe Millay. I am JM Atapi in the home game.
Nice. All right. Today we're going to talk about a hand that was actually posted in the RecPoker forums. Let me just pop it up here real quick. There we go. And it's called What to Do. It was posted by Bug920. I'm going to go through the hand and we'll come to the questions that he has. And then we'll set our wizards loose to see what kind of insights we can share. All right. He's brand new here. He had a particular hand he's been going back and forth over for the last week. I know how he feels. I've done that many times. He's looking for insight, and we'll try to include the entire thought process. So it's 1-2 live, so this is a cash game. He has a history with many of these players at the table, and he plays about 20 hours a week at that particular venue. It's an 8-handed table. The effective stack is 600. The villain has 600, and he has him covered by a little, he says. Under the gun raises to 10. An older Asian who always opens 15x with jacks or queens preflop just to take the blinds and plays other premiums a bit more traditional. So it folds to him on the button, folds to our hero on the button, and he flats with queen 10 of diamonds. Small blind now flats, and the button completes. He does say he considered 3-betting, but under the gun would have blasted, and I don't mind the hand multi-way. So what do we think now, guys, after the action on preflop? What are our thoughts? Taylor?
Yeah, so I mean we have Queen 10 suited on the button versus an early position open. I think Queen 10 makes a really nice three betting hand. It has a lot of properties in terms of blocking cards. It's got connectivity for potential straights and flush draws to play post flop, and we're gonna be in position post flop. However, I'm less inclined to three bet versus an under the gun open. But if it was, a cutoff, hijack, later position open, I would definitely be three betting in this spot. So, given that we're going to be against someone who should have a tight range, I'm totally good with the call here and taking this multi-way. Even if the small blind and big blind come along, which they do, we're going to have a hand that plays pretty darn well post flop. And yeah, I'll play in position with Queen 10 suited.
Yeah, I actually I don't mind either one, three bet or call here. The one thing I would caution is in just the thinking here or the explanation here, which is a parenthetical on this, which is I considered three betting, but under the gun would have blasted, and I don't mind the hand multi-way. And I think um I think that's maybe talking ourselves into rationalizing our own decisions because like really? They're just gonna blast off with everything they have when we three bet here? Is that I mean maybe you know this player type, but I think that's pretty rare. And if it is that player type, I think we want to like I mean that's a player we can obviously target for something pretty significant when we do have some very good holdings in this spot. But unless we're up against somebody who's just going to do this absolutely relentlessly. I wouldn't want to just discount it because I'm scared of a four bet from my opponent. Um, so that's the only thing I would just I don't think I don't honestly think your opponent is just going to blast after you if you just three bet here like every time. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, it's part of the three bet, right? Especially with Queen 10 suited. Like, even if, like, I was talking about, like, hey, it'd be better if it was later position. Like, they can still have aces in later position. Like, that can
right.
still be a thing. They can still four bet you with aces. Um, but however, like, sometimes it's the post hand. You hear some of the post hand thoughts coming into when you describe a hand. Because you'll hear sometimes people when they describe a hand, they're like, "Oh yeah, they just called from later position, and that's usually indicative of you found out what the hand was and they were like, oh, they just called with like ace king in those spots, and you sometimes hear from people, so that may be what's going on. But also part of it might just be that intuition you have sometimes. That's kind of the same thing that I'm cautioning a bit here too, like, hey, this person's gonna blast off in this spot, like they're gonna four bet more likely here, and it's like, well, what position would you expect to four bet you the most versus your three bets? If you three bet them from the button, the most likely spot that you're going to be up against that's going to four bet you is under the gun from early position. They're going to have the strongest range that would potentially play back at you. So maybe that's your intuition that is also coming into play here, saying, well, they're going to blast off a bunch. And it's like, well, it's because you're going against a strong range. And that's the thought process we should be thinking through, not, hey, this person's going to blast off into us and four bet us.
Yeah, I love that, Taylor. That makes so much sense. From a theory standpoint, what he's saying is absolutely correct, but the way he is presenting it is how, or the way he's thinking about it is not exactly, grounded in theory. So the theory says, yeah, under the gun is going to be a lot more tight. So we have to play tighter against him. As opposed to, say, the cutoff raised. If the cutoff raised, I think Queen 10 is almost an automatic three bet in that spot. Um, unless you expect to get a light squeeze from, say, the small blind or the big blind, then maybe you want to call and get a little more dead money in the middle. But yeah, the cutoff's going to have a much wider range, and a hand like Queen 10 could be three bet very easily and probably, take the pot down right then, pre-flop. So,
Right.
but under the gun, though, he's going to be much stronger.
One other thing to think about here too is that I think against a strong under the gun range. And you're going to want to mix things up, and there's no one strategy for any one of these hands. But a hand like Ace Queen of Diamonds, right, versus Queen Ten of Diamonds. Ace Queen of Diamonds actually benefits a little bit more from taking this sort of like calling action against this strong range where we don't want to get blasted off our equity with a hand like that. Whereas Queen 10 actually benefits um, from getting some folds from some hands that might be dominating us. Um, and is a hand that maybe, I mean, it's a bummer to fold Queen 10. It's a nice, pretty hand, but it's not the end of the world. Like Ace Queen is a much like t so I'm just if I'm balancing like thinking about my entire range, I think Queen 10 and Queen 9 are really attractive um, three bets in this kind of spot because they're actually easier to fold if we get four bet. And so, it's just worth considering in this spot. I would be flatting with this sometimes too. So it's not that there's anything wrong with that. And you do want to be careful against an under the gun range, especially one that you might have a read on where you're like, well, they bet big with jacks and queens, but they do other things with premiums. Like you might have a really strong read on this opponent. And if you have that read, um, then I think flatting makes more sense. But it's an attractive three bet. So maybe do it sometimes.
Well, Queen Jack. Queen Jack suited is. Do we always three bet Queen Jack suited here, or
I would rather flat with Queen Jack and three bet with Queen 10.
okay? All right.
Personally, I don't know if I don't know if I'm right, but I would personally rather because I really like I don't like the stronger the hand is, but the more like I really want to see a flop that but it's doesn't benefit from folds as much. Those are the hands that I'm more likely to
Okay.
flat with. Or the
So
more
the
speculative ones like a pocket fives or sixes or something like that.
right. So like you say, the ace king, ace queen suited, queen jack suited, very, very strong hands. And queen 10, we're starting to lose. Now we have a gapper, so we're starting
Yep.
to lose some of that equity, and it's better just to see a flop with it. All right. I like it. Okay, so both the blinds flat, or both the blinds come in, and now we see a flop. Remember, our hand is the queen 10 of diamonds. Now we see a flop, and it's a queen of clubs, 10 of clubs, five of hearts. Now the under the gun leads for 15, and our hero raises it to 65, and the small blind now all of a sudden wakes up and raises to 225. And the action folds back to our hero. So he comments in here that I have a history with the small blind as well. I consider him the only other thinking player at the table. The rest of the table has 100 to 300 stacks, and it's been fairly easy to chip up against them. Also, I have in the back of my head a hand we played months ago where this guy stacked me on an ace 10-5 flop when he flopped top two and the opponent flopped a set of fives. So this is in his head right now that this is a guy that stacked me in almost the same situation, where he had ace 10 in that case, but it was ace 10-5. He flopped the top two. This guy flopped a set of five. So he's got that in the back of his mind. So his thoughts are he's dead to four outs. He has a 15 out draw and a minuscule chance that we have the same hand. So he's dead to a set, or he has 15 to outdraw. I don't understand what he
I think
means
he's
there.
saying he's up against like a,
Oh,
a really
against,
great
yes,
combo draw. Yeah, I think is what he's
yes, yeah,
thinking.
yeah. He's up against a combo draw where you have a flush and a straight draw to give yourself 15 outs. So he figures if he has the best hand, he's looking at somebody who has 15 outs against him. And if he's dead to the set, then he only has 4 outs to improve. So what do we think, guys? What is our plan of action here?
Well, I would just say I don't quite agree with that assessment. Like if we really think that, if we really think the only way small blind is raising us is if they have a set of fives or they've got king jack of clubs. Like that's it, right? Or maybe jack nine of clubs. Jack nine of clubs and king jack of clubs. So they've got like three combos of fives and like two combos of club draws and then they don't have anything else. Um well, yeah, then I don't know. I don't know if I probably am even considering folding if I really think that. Um, but I think that villain, especially one that we're labeling a thinking player, probably has some nut club draws, probably has maybe some good queens, queen X, like an ace queen that they flatted from the small blind, maybe finds a or a king queen kind of holding, might find this kind of raise. Um they probably have king jack that's not the club version. You know, I think there's some other possibilities in here. They could have ace five of clubs um and find this kind, and those are hands that we are pretty delighted to get it in with top two. So if we really think they're limited to this narrow band, I probably am folding. Um, but I don't honestly believe that most villains, especially thinking villain, if they're a thinking villain, then they probably understand some of the power of those kinds of holdings and are probably raising with them too. So I'm probably getting this in against most players right here, but I'd be curious what others are thinking.
Yeah, I'm always getting this in. Like I don't care how you describe opponent and anything like that. Like just breaking down this hand, just the math says like we should be going with this because what hands are we scared that we would be up against if we went all in here? The answers are queens, which we block and opponent took a passive action preflop, tens, which we block and opponent took a passive action preflop, and fives. Every other hand, I'm okay getting it in with here. Give them the nut flush draw, a straight draw, straight and flush draw, like all those things. I'm happy to get the chips in the middle here against those. And they can have hands that we have beat although maybe not likely, the only hand that Chris didn't mention that I think is potentially possible is like a queen five suited of a different suit for top and bottom pair, which we would love to be up against again. But it's like there's so many hands that like we're all right being up against, and really I'm only scared of pocket fives here. And when that's the case, I'm just always going to get the chips in the middle. Like they're going to have the pocket fives one out of, 20 times when we get the hand in here, but then there's going to be 19 other hands that I'm happy to be flipping or in way better shape.
Or they just fold too, like, right? That's the other like beautiful thing that could happen here. So yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, and you know, the small blind put in 225 chips, which is, like two-thirds over two. He's got committed over two-thirds of his stack
Mhm.
into the middle. So he's putting in a very healthy bet. Obviously it's a cash game, so the bet sizes are generally a little bigger, but he went definitely over three times what our hero raised. So I would expect the under the gun player to fold here.
Yeah.
And I don't think he doesn't really say that, but I'm assuming that he did. And now the decision is back to our hero. And one of the things I've been looking a lot lately at live cash. And typically, if you were going to look at a solver output for pre-flop in a cash game, small blind has very, very few calls when you see a bet and a call in front of you. Small blind will typically, I mean, again, if you're looking at the solver, the only actions they're going to take here is a three bet or a fold. So this tells me that, pocket fives definitely could be in that range as somebody who just saying, hey, a couple guys are in the pot. Maybe I can, maybe I can get lucky and spike a set. Or like you guys were talking about, those types of suited hands, those suited connector type hands that have some connectivity to this board that give the person flush draws or straight draws. And like Taylor said, I'd be more than happy to go to battle with that hand against that range.
Yeah, and I think that's part of. I mean, it kind of goes back to the language used early in the hand, right? The pre-flop language was I considered three betting, but under the gun would have blasted into me. And here, I think we're also really thinking kind of worst case scenario. Like they
Mhm.
either have this monster draw or a hand that's beating us, and we're not really considering the hands that we're either ahead of or like well ahead of. Like if they've got like a good queen, that's a beautiful situation here. If they have like a worse draw, that's a beautiful situation for us. If they've just have like the nut club draw or they just have like those are great situations for us. Um, and so we want to make sure that we're thinking about the entirety of our opponent's range. And yes, sometimes they're going to have the top of it. And yes, sometimes we're going to get it in and they're going to have fives and we are going to be dead to four outs. But even then, like that's the worst case scenario, right? And we still have, like we still have okay equity. It's not good, but they're just not going to have fives that often. And I don't think they're ever going to have tens or queens. Maybe tens of maybe sometimes, but
Unless blockers aren't real.
right, right.
True. True.
So
There's
Yeah,
it
only
just
two
yeah, go ahead,
tens
Taylor.
left in the deck.
Right.
yeah. Just to talk about like equity and spots because we're talking so confidently about like, oh, like we're okay with this, but not everyone knows like the different equities. If we give opponent King Jack suited, so they have the royal draw, um, we have 47% equity versus that. And given the chips in the middle, I think it's easy to say like, yeah, that's a plus EV decision for us to be making. If they have Jack nine suited, it's a 49-51 situation, so we've got 49% equity. And if they have just the nut flush draw, so ace of clubs, some other club to go with it that doesn't have a straight draw, we have 63.5% equity. So like in spots that we're like close to flipping, if you consider the dead money in the middle, it's a positive decision for us. But the times they have that like ace, whatever, flush draw, or maybe it's like king jack, one club, or whatever the suit was. Sorry, I don't remember what the suit was, but
Yeah,
king
club,
jack
club.
one, or jack nine, one of those. Like we just have so much equity in that spot that it's like in a cash without thinking about tournament life decisions. Like, yeah, this is just a spot that we have to accept as poker players that we're going to get every so often, and we're going to take high equity decisions or high variance decisions when we've got the right equity.
Right.
I
And
think
I
this,
get oh go ahead, Rob.
I was just going to say the reasoning, worrying about the pocket fives and worrying about being dead to four outs. I wish that sometime people would look and say, okay, what is his range? What range am I facing here? Instead, you look at a flop and you say, oh man, he could have this or he could have that. Well, what is his entire range? And that's what we're really dealing with, right? We've got two pairs, so we got the board pretty locked up. but what is his entire range? And then consider what would he be making those actions, what parts of his range would he be making those actions with? And so far, nobody has mentioned that other than, of course, in our conversation.
Mhm. Mhm.
Now, we've had a couple of um, responses in here, one by our own Chris Jones, where he pretty much expounded exactly the way he did here in the podcast in his post. We had another one from Hawk Plays, and he talked about getting in some Flopzilla work to go through the hand and and I love that because he's actually thinking in terms of what does his entire range look like. So we can put what we think his entire range looks like into Flopzilla and compare it to, we know what our specific hand is. So we don't have to do a range versus range as much as range versus our hand. And we can do that work in Flopzilla. And it sounds like Taylor did something similar to that to get some of the equities that he got. But that's a very, very good way of starting to look at things in terms of ranges instead of hands that you're worried about. Is there any other rabbit holes we can go down with this one? Do we want to talk about?
I think this is good. I mean, it's one of those classic spots where I always use the phrase, you got to just buckle up. You got to just be ready for that bumpy road. Sometimes it's not going to be that bumpy. Sometimes it's going to be bumpy. So just buckle up.
I'll add one last thing because it kind of relates back to the beginning of this hand too. Because I agree, we got to buckle up, but sometimes flatting pre-flop is not the lower variance play. And this is a really great example of a hand where that has come into play. Like, if we're not willing to go with our hand that flops top two, then we should not be flatting with it. We really should be three betting with it because our goal then is to take it down. We're lowering the stack to pot ratio, which makes the value of our hand. When we flop top two and we've already lowered the stack to pot ratio, a lot of these things just we don't even have to worry about them. Plus, hands like this disappear from everybody's range once we start having three bets into our so like yes we're three betting into the under the gun player, yes we have to be careful, yes we have to consider that, yes sometimes we can flat this from the button, but this is one of those exact reasons why three betting is so good in these spots as well, because we don't end up in a four-way hand. We don't end up with the small blind being able to flick in a few chips and be like, yeah, I'll come see it with Jack nine suited or with pocket fives. Like when we three bet from the button, those hands are gone. And so it's just worth considering as we think about this. And it is like when we flat in these spots, sometimes we commit ourselves to the higher variance play, and that can feel counterintuitive, but it is actually, it plays out.
Yeah, so very true. A lot of my coaching sessions when I talk about like late game in poker tournaments, three betting and raising is one of the key ways to help reduce variance when it comes to some of those late game situations, and that's what you're trying to do a lot of the times. However, some of the times that's true. Some of the times you three bet and it is extremely high variance. And that is how it goes. But I think a lot of people have the general reaction of, oh, I'm three betting. This is just going to be a huge hand, high variance. I have to buckle up and, go with it here. But there are definitely instances where if you would just take aggressive action pre-flop, it does help reduce some of those later scenarios of high variance.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier that you might want to flat from the button if you understand that the small blind or the big blind are prone to squeeze overly much. I mean, if they're going to squeeze too much, even with a hand like Queen 10, That means they're squeezing with a lot of junk that you're still ahead of. So you may want to just call to get that person to make a mistake. But other than that, I agree 100% that in normal circumstances, we should probably three betting more. Aggressive actions really make a big difference in the equities that you're going to be facing when you get to the flop and the turn and the river. So I'm going to go ahead and go through. Bug920 gave us the results here. So let's go through the results a little bit. He talked about he felt that the small blind would have been three betting with queens or tens. And then he's not going to squeeze with any suited ace from the small blind, which I kind of disagree with. I mean, if he had ace king of clubs, I think he'd be three betting or squeezing there. He plays mostly 3x or fold from there, and with my button call and his choice to only call, I took the ace high flush draw out as well. And I think that might be, I don't know, unless you know that player that well, I guess. If you know that he's not going to be doing that with ace king of clubs, he's just going to call, try to see a flop. He said, full disclosure, the table was so soft, I felt the risk was not worth the reward, dangling with the only player that could come close to stacking me an hour and a half in. So he'd been there for an hour and a half. So now he's considering how long he's been there, whether he could get stacked or not. So these are considerations that are over and above the actual strategy of that hand in poker. He's taking some external things that really shouldn't have any bearing on that decision. And he did end up tank folding. And the opponent turned over Jack 9 suited for the open-ended straight flush draw. So there we go, folks. Play your hand based on the strategy of the situation. If you have specific reads on an opponent that he is overly aggressive or overly passive, overly tight, overly loose, I mean, obviously take those into consideration, but only as it applies to what range that opponent has. So, any closing thoughts on the hand?
Jack 9 suited makes a lot of sense. I mean, it was one of the hands that we had talked through. I was hoping it wasn't going to be pocket fives. That would have been a little bit painful to actually see us go up against that. But it's like the Jack 9, we had 50% equity. Would have been really interesting to see how it would have played out. But instead, we're down a bit of chips.
All right. Okay. Let's see if I can get the cues going for the music here. And that's it for the RecPoker Podcast Forums edition. I'd like to thank Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino, Joel Millay, our premium member, for joining us, and of course, Taylor and Chris. Thanks, guys, and we'll see you next time.